Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Joy of Sticks. Stickhead here with your Atari ST gaming channel, and we've made it. This is the final episode of the top 50 Atari ST games, and we've reached the big one, the top 5, the very best of the best, as voted for by you. So let's not mess about, shall we? Let's dive straight in.
Number 5.
Guybrush Threepwood has dreams of becoming a pirate. He is, however, the least pirate-like protagonist in the history of pirating, and the way he bumbles through this adventure is wholly appropriate for the appeal of this game. The fact that you're allowed, nay, encouraged to bumble, is a key feature of The Secret of Monkey Island, and for me, it's the first point-and-click game that addresses this problem with the genre. Apparently, Ron Gilbert was really annoyed with how every wrong turn would kill the player in myriad different ways in the contemporary adventure games, so he made it next to impossible for the player to kill Threepwood. Instead of worrying about death at every turn, the player can relax and enjoy the exploration and discovery of solutions to puzzles. Monkey Island uses the SCUM engine used in previous Lucasfilm games like Maniac Mansion, but it modifies it and streamlines it, making it a much more pleasant UI to use. Most of the gameplay takes part on beautifully rendered backgrounds upon which Threepwood must find the solution to various puzzles by talking to the inhabitants of the islands or interacting with certain objects. It's all mouse driven, and the inventory system is iconic in more than one sense of the word. The real stroke of genius with the SCUM system, though, is the way you select a verb and then click on the object in your inventory or the main window to complete a sentence action that Guybrush will execute. It's much more accessible than the old typing and parsing methods seen in older adventure games, and it would go on to become the gold standard. The charm inherent in the game manifests in many ways. The superb animation, the clever writing, the great pixel art cutscenes that all ape and honour the great traditions of high adventure cinema classics. However, I think the biggest contributor to this sense of charm are the characters. Guybrush himself is a lovable idiot, and the main antagonist is a mad fool that, true to tradition, has all the best lines, but it's also the cameos and bit parts that really shine in The Secret of Monkey Island, and some of the characters that only appear on screen for the briefest of scenes remain in the memory to this day. My own personal favourite is the blind as a bat lookout you meet at the very beginning of the game who can't pronounce your name properly. The great thing about this game is that it isn't just funny for a video game, but is genuinely funny, with many set pieces that are still fondly remembered to this day. I think insult sword fighting is a personal highlight. The Secret of Monkey Island has gone on to spawn many sequels, but arguably the very first game represents the best of what the series has to offer.
Number 4.
The Bitmap Brothers sheen is present and correct in this sequel. Superb presentation throughout. Everything is solid, metallic, and oh so shiny. We came to expect great graphics from Bitmap Brother releases, but even by their standards, Speedball 2 is an absolute looker. Everything has received lots of attention to make sure it looks the business. Even the little buttons you press to train up your team between rounds are magnificent. The typically lavish intro sequence sets the scene for a brutal future sport game akin to a lawless game of handball. This is everything a sequel should be. It maintains everything that was great about the original while evolving it and adding a ton of interesting embellishments around the periphery. The core game is still very similar to the original Speedball in that you and your team of hard knocks must grab the ball and chuck it downfield in order to score a goal. Rules are minimal, so you can punch and kick the crap out of your opponents in order to do so. So, what does Speedball 2 add to the mix? An absolute shed-load, as it turns out. Let's start with the pitch you're playing on. There are many strategic spots adorning this metallic arena, most of which can be exploited for points or help you in the pursuit of points. There are stars that give you a nice bonus if you light them all up, a looping ramp that will multiply any points you do earn, and these little nipples that turn the ball into a red-hot sphere of pain that your opponents just can't bear to touch. Strewn about the arena floor, you'll find money to pick up, which you can spend on upgrading your team, as well as power-ups to give you an advantage for the current match. There are further additions too. Each player now has their own individual statistics for things like stamina, pace, and throwing strength. And if you're playing in a tournament, you can spend money to train them up for the next match, or just drop them and raid the transfer market for your next star. Speedball 2 is one of those games that uses the single fire button of the ST to great effect, and you can tap the fire button for a low throw or hold it for a lob, and pressing a direction just as you're about to release the ball has like an aftertouch effect, further modifying the trajectory of the ball. All of this gives the player a great impression of control over proceedings. The future sports sim genre was a little oversaturated in the 90s, but this game is the very, very best of the lot. Our second Bitmap Brothers game in a row, but this one delivering a rendition of their track Mega Blast, which tells you of the cool British hip-hop scene that the Bitmaps were attempting to tap into in order to give their games more cachet. And the British gaming press lapped it up with Zero, The One, Games Machine, Ace, CVG and ST Format all giving the game their top award. Zenon II isn't so much an originator in the genre, instead choosing to refine everything seen in the genre so far, all buffed up to a nice shine. It's pretty much a standard vertically scrolling shoot 'em up, albeit a very western feeling one, so think Tyrian rather than Tauplan. You travel up the screen and basically try to ruin the day of all the squiggly aliens you meet along the way. Where Zenon II shines, however, is in its visual design. Your ship looks uber cool, and so do the enemies it was made to destroy. The first level has you flying through a deliciously organic looking cave with a smooth parallax scrolling seaweed background accompanying you as you blast strange enemies and disgusting worms. This level is also the first time you're introduced to the stunningly huge bosses. You'll struggle to find a more lovingly rendered Nautilus tentacle monster on any system. The next level is some sort of insectile hell that climaxes with the most terrifying 8-legged nope that you will ever encounter this side of the Australian outback. Further volcanic, crystalline and metallic worlds await, all populated by beautifully drawn enemies and astounding bosses, and each one even more beautiful than the last. But that's assuming that you get that far. You see, Zenon II is really difficult. It's an absolute blast. Luckily, you aren't just left with your bog standard vanilla ship with which to blast these xenomorphic horrors. Along the way you will find various power-ups to help you on this monumental journey, and a rather charming alien has set up shops halfway through each level in which you can purchase these upgrades. The great thing about Zenon II is that these power-ups don't just power up your ship, but physically bolt on extra bits and bobs to your ship that drastically alter the way it looks. By the end of a playthrough, your pristine, elegant ship will have become more akin to a hastily patched together Rube Goldberg machine spitting out a random assortment of rockets, lasers and missiles. The Bitmap brothers are sometimes accused of style over substance, but what if that style is itself substantial? Well, that's Zenon II in a nutshell right there.
Number 2.
I waxed lyrical about the paranormal abilities of Jeff Crammond last episode in the F1 Grand Prix section, so excuse me if I save myself the embarrassment of gushing about his brilliance all over again and instead get on with describing this unique racing experience. You see, Stunt Car Racer is quite a novel racing game where the tracks are less racetracks and more roller coasters. As you career around these tracks, you'll be constantly battling your car, the track itself, and that git Gravity, oh, not him again, to try and keep your vehicle on the road. These tracks get ever more challenging, starting with the rather tame little ramp and progressing to the nightmarish ski jump. The great thing about Stunt Car Racer, and the thing that will keep you coming back for more, is how you've got to learn these tracks inside out in order to master them. Similar to how a Formula 1 driver must know the perfect speed and racing line at which to attack each corner of Monaco or Silverstone, you must learn the ideal speeds to attack each ramp on the stepping stones or drawbridge. Too slow and you won't make it to the other side, but too fast and you'll overshoot and land too heavily. And you'll want to avoid these heavy landings at all costs, because they could scupper your chances of success over the season. You see, damage is a central mechanic in Stunt Car Racer, As you race, each little bump and scrape will cause a crack to progress along the top of the chassis. Reach the end of the race before the crack reaches the end of the screen and you've done well, as the crack will reset, ready for your next race. Take a more significant prang, however, and this will put a gaping hole in your car's chassis. Not only does the crack travel much quicker through a section with a hole, but also these holes are not reset for each new race, instead remaining a part of your car like some kind of war wound throughout the whole season. Get too many of these and you might not be able to finish the season at all, as it's actually quite necessary to take some crack damage in order to go fast enough to compete on these wild tracks. This risk-reward balance is what great games are made of, and Stunt Car Racer has you teetering on the edge of that balance the whole time you're playing. Whether that's you trying to eke out every last drop of speed from a corner without careening off the edge, or knowing that your current speed going into a ramp will improve your time but cause you a significant amount of damage. You have to weigh all these factors up in order to succeed at the highest level of Stunt Car Racer.
Number 1.
It's an understatement to say that Dungeon Master revolutionised the computer role-playing game genre when it was released in 1987. It sounds a little glib to say it was the first real-time RPG with mouse control and a 3D view, like that's somehow the grand total of what the game offered. Those statements are true, but it's the rich detail of the world and how evocative an experience that this model of user interface allowed that makes Dungeon Master shine. This game has a ton of imitators with better graphics and more features, and yet here it is, still sitting at the number 1 spot, and that really testifies to the brilliance of Dungeon Master. First of all, consider the context. Dungeon Master was released in 1987. This is a particularly important year for fans of the RPG genre. It's the year that saw the Western release of The Legend of Zelda on the NES and the release of Final Fantasy in Japan. Now, these were games that wanted the video game experience to be deeper and broader than the usual arcade-inspired blasters. They would take their inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons and previous role-playing computer games such as Ultima, but attempted to present these adventures in a way that was much more accessible to your average games player. Dungeon Master achieved that, but goes much, much further than those other games, and looking at them side by side gives you an impression of how that was achieved. For a start, Dungeon Master presents the environment from your protagonist's point of view. This made the game so immersive. You felt what your adventurers felt. That first encounter on the first floor of the dungeon with a mummy behind the portcullis is forever burnt into my memory, thanks to the pulse-quickening fear I felt. I've never been so reluctant to press a button in my whole gaming history. Other role-playing games had you staring down upon the action from above, like some kind of detached deity, and they just couldn't evoke the same visceral connection to the events on the screen. Add to that a brilliant and intuitive icon-driven mouse interface, and this golden balance of strategic depth combined with ease of accessibility was achieved. But that's just the foundation of what makes Dungeon Master so brilliant. Using these systems, FTL have constructed a compelling quest. Your mentor, the all-powerful Grey Lord, upon discovering the power gem, has vowed to use it to create a peaceful, utopic world in which all that is good can thrive. Unfortunately, he makes a bit of a grievous balls-up when executing the incantation, and it resulted in a catastrophic explosion that rents the world in two, and the Grey Lord himself. Now, the good side of the Grey Lord, Lord Librasalus, is stuck in limbo, and it's his dark side, Lord Chaos, that is free to wreak havoc upon all reality. So it's down to you to enter Mount Anais to find the Fire Staff, return it to Lord Librasalus so that he can halt this catastrophic turn of events. The only problem is, the cataclysm destroyed your body too. So it's your spirit that must enter the Hall of Champions and resurrect those heroes who are worthy of this monumental task. And herein lies the brilliance of Dungeon Master. There isn't a step-by-step tutorial explaining what you must do for the first couple of levels of this dungeon, and there isn't a handy hint system advising you on how to build the best party. All there is a fantastic interface, a dungeon full of nasties, and you. You're left to figure out the best way to proceed. You must experiment with different characters, abilities, and equipment to find the best way to progress. This learning journey is integral to what makes Dungeon Master so appealing. The first time you play, you might succumb to hunger on floor 4, so next time you make sure to stock up on food at every opportunity. The next run through, you might get horribly lost in a devious maze section, so you resolve to draw a map next time. Let's not forget that you couldn't just pull up a walkthrough on GameFAQs in 1987. Progression in Dungeon Master is hard-earned, and all the more rewarding because of that. But here's the rub. Every time I failed in Dungeon Master, I didn't feel frustrated. I just felt steeled and determined to make sure I didn't make the same mistake again next time.